So we're combining 2 and 3 because while a lot happened in both of them, it's hard to put into words, but the second session was more of a dungeon crawl, and the majority of the time was spent in combat. And so I didn't quite have enough material to fully summarize a campaign diary for that would have made for a decent video in my opinion. And I do think it's absolutely worth watching that session if you want the full picture of what happened, because I don't think my brief summary will do it justice. But the third session, more than enough happened that I can talk about some things in there. So we're combining them both together, and now we're good to go. So when we last left off, beginning of session 2, they were talking with Natalia, who is a catfolk, and she gave them some advice. She said, look out for the antler monsters and don't eat the grapes. And then she dove into a portal, more or less, because she had already figured out the gimmick of the gimmick of the dungeon. There we go. In that it is faith-based. And so she knew where she was going. She was going to the false Tangle Park. And so she was just able to will herself there effectively. The players did not eat the grapes, but Lysias took some grapes, perhaps to eat them later. And were able to avoid the antler monsters just fine. They discovered that the grapes could come to life and become creatures, more or less, and then the grapes escaped and or were dealt with. There was a beetle in the hallway. They realized that beetle can help them hallucinate, and if they hallucinate, then to a degree, the dungeon will shape their beliefs into physicality. So we had someone with a licorice for a finger and with a grape hand, that kind of thing. And then they went to the feast room, and the feast room is fairly normal, but with a wall full of mouths on it, and one mouth in particular is bigger than the rest. There's a note saying, don't feed the big mouth. Of course, the big mouth ended up getting fed multiple times throughout this adventure. And it effectively, if someone gets digested, they can just straight up die if someone ends up in the mouth. Otherwise, it is just a round delay before it burps and does a ridiculous amount of concussive damage. What was it they did to go into the next area? I believe that they did a faith-based thing to go to the false playground in the Tangle. But they arrive at the end where the children are, and where a false doppelganger of Warwick is. It's not a doppelganger, I'm just using it as a terminology. And they believe that this doppelganger must be fake, that he must be made out of wood or something like that, and whatnot. And he very much was not fake in that sense. And the term woodbrain was coined as an insult, which I'm quite pleased with. The party then played a bit of politics between the children and this false gardener. And this is where things get a bit too complicated to fully summarize. A lot of things happened. Some of it was combat. A lot of it was nonsense with portals, of opening doors, believing that there would be a starfield there that led them to where they want to be, and effectively min-maxing the experience of the dungeon. Before that, though, there was a long rest, and a madness mechanic was unveiled. One player, because their character is built such that both their wisdom and charisma were dumped, and the mechanics were tied to those two stats, ended up going to a dream realm, you would say, that we've just been calling the bakery, where they were put in contact with a figure known as the Baker of Hearts. And the Baker of Hearts gave them some basic information, let them know that if they want more, they are welcome to open the door, but just a little bit, because if you open it too much, you're going to go mad. They opted not to open the door, but once they... But like the seed was planted when they went and told the other players about it. Irv is a glutton for punishment when it comes to these type of things, so now that he was aware of this, he chose to fail his saving throws to get to the bakery and then open the door, looking for information on how to escape. And escape is easy. Just like with the rest of the dungeon, it's faith-based. So the spoons are actually false. They are fake. They are not the way to escape. They are not keys. The false gardener was merely planting that in people's heads to keep them here, so they wouldn't figure out that they can escape at any time effectively. Because if they believed that they needed these spoons to escape, well, then these people wouldn't escape. When combat finally started with this false gardener, they swapped their madness effect from the real gardener over to Lysias, and so Lysias started going crazy for spoons and whatnot. And the party restrained Lysias, and there's a little bit of infighting that this creature was able to take advantage of by turning invisible and hiding and doing all sorts of shenanigans. It was a fun little combat encounter, but this false Warwick was CR3. He was not meant to wipe the party or be that much of a threat. He was more just a last little encounter at the very end that they could fuck with people. That doesn't mean that it didn't stop the players from creating other problems of their own and turning it into a deadly scenario. One of them almost died, but at the very end of combat, it was a very clutch play where they did Hellish Rebuke as they were falling unconscious, which rolled just enough damage to down this fake Warwick. Because otherwise the fake Warwick would have just killed them in the next turn. So that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that. The children were all convinced to leave, even though they realized that they were giving up the banquet room where they had access to all sorts of candy. They were all convinced to go back home to their parents, except one, because they had no faith in the party, because the party had done nothing but be suspicious assholes thus far. Which, being suspicious assholes worked for a lot of the other characters, but not for this one. Maximus was a bit too smart for his own good. He stayed behind, and before combat ended, he ended up dying to this fake Warwick. On top of that, during the portal nonsense, the real Warwick, even though he'd regained consciousness, the escape mechanics weren't properly explained to him, and so he died to the antler creatures at the vineyard. So there were 2 NPC casualties, but no players died, so that's a win in my book. The aftermath, going into session 3, was that the kids went home with the Arcane Wardens once enough people spread rumors in the streets that there's a bunch of people with a bunch of kids covered in blood walking around. So the Wardens came and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll make sure the kids get home. You guys should go clean up and go home too. Instead of going home, they decided, yeah, we'll just go collect our reward right now. But it was too early in the morning. Jolene wasn't there yet, so they went to the Greasy Pan to hang out. Which, I'm pleased with that, because this location that was improv has become like their second home besides the chess club room. They decided not to hang out at the chess club room because Lysias dissected the fake Warwick in the chess club room. So it's not the cleanest right now. Not the most appetizing place to hang out. They eventually did go to Jolene Clove and they got their reward, and she's like, oh yeah, absolutely, let me know when you want to go adventuring next, but you've more than earned time off. She did not think it was going to be that harrowing of an experience. And so they went home, and the rest of the session was more or less just how would the city react to this? Well, the city has a newspaper, so the most prominent newspaper would probably, the very next day, as soon as these rumors merely touch their ears, they would dash out and try and interview these new champions of Tombstone. Because while the Arcane Wardens certainly exist, the Arcane Wardens are more preoccupied with what lies below in the Fell City and not so much with what's up above. They don't tend to take threats above ground very seriously. They take their wards that they place very seriously, but that's supposed to be all they need to do to keep those threats at bay, and for the most part, they're right. That is all they need to do to keep those threats at bay. So the above ground Arcane Wardens tend to be a little bit irresponsible, and so when heroes emerge that rescue children from some gingerbread house of madness, it makes the news. So I had 2 NPCs I got to introduce, Chatterman, a chipmunk folk, who I had a little bit of fun with, but for the most part, he's a very simple guy. He's more the interview type where he will just rapid fire questions and get every single detail he can as quick as possible. But the other one, Oakley Omenhorn, who is an oxfolk, he's a lot more methodical, and he'll actually try and get you talking, try and get you to tell a story instead of specifically asking something. He'll ask questions that will lead you to exposit more than what the question initially was asking for, to get you rolling, so to speak. And playing those interviewers was a lot of fun. A lot of information got swapped around. Some events were put into motion. For example, a minor event, Algae is set to become the fashion icon of Tombstone. Pointy hats are about to become the height of fashion. And she's coined 2 terms, calling people who are just a little bit dumb such a scriggle. Like, oh, you're such a scriggle is a term that she coined, and she also has begun popularizing the phrase woodbrain as a general catch-all insult, which pleases me greatly, because the players are getting into the culture of this. And Algae in particular was a lot of fun that session. As Kyle explained it as, look, she's a country girl and she's getting attention now, and it's going to her head immediately. It's like, yeah, you're not wrong. Poor Oakley, though, he couldn't catch a break when, as soon as he arrived at Scriggle's house where Lysias was staying, Lysias had already fucked off to the lake, so he had to go to the lake, and he had to run all around town, and it wasn't something that I had planned, because I didn't know where Lysias was going to be, but it was something that I thought was funny as it proceeded to effectively be a looping scenario that ruins this poor Oxfolk's day. Yados did tell his mother about the Baker of Hearts, and his mother is a very powerful wizard and semi-retired member of the Arcane Warden. She's not allowed to go down below because she has a lingering injury that would... They value her more alive as an advisor rather than dead as a potential adventurer and powerhouse down below. So they mostly are just like, no, you stay up here. You're stationed up here and you advise us. Something that she is a bit bitter about, because while she has wealth and power and she has pretty much everything she could want, she's no longer allowed to adventure, to partake in the hunting of these elves and in the politics down below. She's trapped above ground, so to speak, and while, yes, that is safe and most people would prefer that, she does not. She would prefer to be able to fully bring her might to the fight, so to speak. But she certainly would recognize the term Baker of Hearts and report it, and so gears have been set into motion. They've begun to turn, where eventually, I think they'd want to bring in the entire party for questioning, but at the very least, they very much want to talk to Lysias and Scriggle now, because those were the two that were influenced by the Baker, and they want to figure out what's going on. I'm not sure exactly how hardball I'm gonna play. Zone of Truth is a bard spell, and they would have access to a handful of bards, but for the most part, that organization would be arcane. So I probably won't hardball and do Zone of Truth. I'll probably do Detect Thoughts instead, which they can, without burrowing too deep, they can influence where the conversation goes to try and influence the surface thoughts. So I think that would be more than enough than they needed more often than not. So I think we'll be fine there. I don't think I have to play too hardball whenever I do go and interview them, which I guess is going to happen next session, because it sounds like they're looking to take some downtime. Had they not taken downtime and leapt right in the next quest, then I don't think the Arcane Wardens would be that quick to respond, and we'd be able to ignore it for a time and put it off. But if they're taking downtime, then like a day or two into their downtime, this event will certainly happen. Beyond that, we got to introduce Lysias's acquaintance, a shadowy figure known as Chime, who has a distorted voice that is distorted such that your ear recognizes it as the noise wind chimes make on a fairly breezy day, but that your brain can interpret it as actual speech. Effectively, it's being altered magically, which I thought that was a cool effect. I'm like, yeah, I'll make a shadowy figure named Chime. This will be cool. I'm quite pleased with this NPC, even though they are definitely not something that I want to be a part of the campaign, because if they make too frequent of an appearance, it's probably because they're here to kill the players. And one-on-one, the players are not ready for Chime. As a party, they probably could defeat Chime, so there's always that. But ideally, Chime will not become a threat. Chime will just become an omen and a resource that they may utilize, perhaps. But that introduced that element of Lysias' backstory, which I don't want to spoil. I know that sometimes I like to spoil things in these campaign diaries, but Lysias is nonsense. I don't think I want to spoil that, and I think that is something that I want people to discover it organically, if that makes sense. But we got to introduce that element. Lysias and Scriggle decided it was a good idea to go and talk to the Baker after ducking into a shady as fuck alleyway. Talking to the Baker involves them going into a dream space, so effectively their bodies fall unconscious while they're in this dream space. And they thought it was a good idea to go unconscious willingly in a shady alleyway in a city that they both know is riddled with gangs and crime. So they sure did get their gold immediately stolen. So their reward money went bye-bye. That wasn't anything I planned. That was just the players being silly, and I was like, this is what would happen. I mean, if two unconscious people with pockets ripe with riches would be robbed in this alleyway. That's just how it works. And I did roll for it just in case. I used their passive perception to see if they'd wake up versus the stealth roll, and the stealth roll was a nat 20, so they both got stolen from. It's just how it works. They then returned to the alleyway and roughed up a poor elderly vagrant into giving them information that it was stolen by a mousefolk who on that day was wearing green and who had, I think it was the left ear that was pierced by a golden band. So I need to flesh out that character. I know who that mousefolk works for, but I need to give them a name and flesh out the character a little bit and come up with an excuse for the party to encounter this being again. But at the same time, I want to make it interesting and not just, the party runs into them and they all surround him and beat the shit out of him until he tells them where their money is. And if the money's spent, then I don't know what they're gonna do. So I need to actually turn that into an encounter. But that's something I can put in my pocket. The Arcane Wardens are something I can put in my pocket. the beginning of the next quest, so I can put in my pocket. So I have more than enough fuel for session 4. This isn't anything I'm remotely worried about. I think that's just about it. I think we will... Oh, okay. One more thing. We got a little bit of a peek into Yados's lavish life that he is loath to enjoy. I enjoyed role-playing the servants in the manor and setting up that kind of social structure of dinner parties and of his parents using him and his story as more or less a token to impress their dinner guests for more or less political gain. I thought that was a cool scene because it really shows that Yados is not on good terms with his family, and it's because they kind of are like aristocrats, but the annoying type of aristocrat. His father is an archaeologist and just general collector of weird oddities and artifacts. And so he asked if they had taken anything back from this dungeon that could be studied. Perhaps it has runes on it or the like. And Yados let slip that actually we got this spoon made of bones with runes on it. Lysias has it. And he's like, oh, this sounds fascinating. If you could set up a brunch with this Lysias, I would love to talk with him and examine said spoon. So that's another little event that we've now set up for later. So it was a very fun session. But I'm gonna stop talking now. You have a good night. Bye bye.